Okay, is it on? Yep. All right, cool. So, welcome to the podcast, and today we're talking about Go Like Hell, Ford Ferrari, and their battle for speed and glory at Le Mans. So, Ford and Ferrari are two different car companies from different regions, but did you know they had a rivalry in 1964? Well, saddle up, buckaroos, because I'm going to explain how Ford put the Italian tyrant in his place and won one of the greatest races of all time. And totally not ripping this off intro from a car channel that may have donuts. This is what you need to know to get up to speed on Go Like Hell, Ford Ferrari, and their battle for speed and glory at Le Mans. And if it wasn't obvious, spoilers ahead! So what exactly causes war for speed and glory? Well, we don't get told that till Chapter 6, but Chapter 5 sheds some light what would later cause this historical event. The first small thing it talks about is the racetrack in which this battle will happen, aka the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which started in 1923 and is happening this year as well. It begins showing a man being thrown through the air as he's crashed and killed both himself and some spectators. This sheds some light on the dangers of this track and how it can be the beginning and end of a racer's career.
Chapter 1. Henry Ford II.
We began with Henry Ford opening his eyes just before 8 on a November morning. As he walked out, two men were waiting for him by a limo with an American V8 Lincoln. He then entered the Ford Motor Company and asked his secretary for sale margins and realized that sales have gone down a bit. See, companies like Chevy and Pontiac were starting to become more popular with their GT cars because of a little old American sport called NASCAR. See, NASCAR is a way to show what your cars are made of, power-wise and reliability. Ford was falling behind with their technology as kids would prefer a Chevy Chevelle over a Ford Mustang. We then get to see a bit of his past and see how the company was handed over to Mr. Ford II. We then get sent back to modern day, and then in a loud voice, "These guys are cheating! We have to do something!" The only reason why the Duke didn't want to put his cars in big races is because of bad publicity. He then quotes the younger generation, "Ford cars are for old people." He then stated that they are going to try to develop new sports cars and bump the power for others as Ford was going to lead the charge once again for another technological breakthrough.
Chapter 2. Enzo Ferrari.
Enzo Ferrari is great but also horrible. See, the reason for his inspiration to make cars happened due to the 1908 Circuito di Bologna, where he witnessed Felix Nazzaro's victory at the age of 10. He was undereducated, but his passion for vehicles and racing were immense. He had a son called Dino who had a terminal illness called muscular dropsy. Enzo would keep a book near him writing down the amount of times he had eaten and drank. Dino would talk to his father about the puppy, which was referring to the inline-4 2.5-liter V6 engine that both Enzo and Dino were making. Dino wanted to develop his own engine before he passed, and both traded ideas on how to make it. The conversations will go on for hours, but not only that, but Ferrari had contacted the best engineer in Italy who worked for Alfa Romeo at the time, and they would make sketches and see how they could make the dream come true. Both were so invested in this engine that even though Dino was on his deathbed, he was making great achievements. He sadly died on June 30th, 1956. This hit Enzo hard, and then we see a flashback on how the Ferrari name was made. He began working at Alfa Romeo in 1919 as he managed the racing division and also raced himself. He would later retire in 1931. During one race, the parents of an Italian war hero approached him. Their son Baracca had died in an air fight in 1919 but was hailed as a hero, and something that their late son had was a black prancing horse that was on the side of his plane each time he would go into battle. Baracca's mother told the young driver, "Ferrari, why don't you put my son's Cavian Rampero on your car? It will bring you good luck." Ferrari then put the prancing horse in the middle of the yellow shield that Alfa's racing division had, and in which will later become one of the most recognizable logos in the world!
Chapter 3. The Chicken Farmer.
This is one of the weakest chapters, but let's talk about it anyways. To begin with, Chapter 3 is the man, the myth, the Kentucky Cobra himself, Carroll Shelby.
My name's Carroll Shelby, and performance is my business.
We are told how Mr. Shelby began and ended his racing career. It all began at Lewisburg, Texas in 1933. He was born with a heart condition that didn't allow him to do anything for most of his childhood. But once the doc gave him a clean bill of health, he started tearing apart go-karts and learning everything he could about things that went vroom vroom. When the U.S. was pulled into Dub Dub 2, he joined the Army Air Corps in which he trained pilots. After the war, he became a chicken farmer, but one day he was able to convince his friend to drive his MGTC streetcar on the track, and his first time out in the puny British Roadster with a wooden frame, he won it. And a few hours after, he entered a race filled with Jaguars XK120s. You know, for fun. And against all odds, he drove that little MG to victory. This didn't go unnoticed, and Aston Martin offered him a chance to race at Le Mans and freaking won. He raced through the 50s, but his racing days were cut. In the 60s, his heart condition came back, and his final race at the Continental Drive Raceway, he He had a nitroglyceride tablet under his tongue to help with the chest pain, but despite that, he still won. He would later create Shelby America and collaborate with Ford to make some iconic cars.
Chapters 4 and 5. The Downfall of Enzo Ferrari.
After being victorious 5 years straight at Le Mans and IndyCar, Enzo wanted to build and perfect his cars and find the right driver for it too. That's when an American named Phil started working for the Italian car tyrant and would become the first American to win the Grand Prix. Phil would talk about how in the Grand Prix that out of the 4 original team members he started with, he and his friend Trips were the only one remaining due to them dying at the track. He also talked about how they would see their fallen teammates and competitors being carried off in 1 or 2 body bags. Sometimes they couldn't eat because their stomachs were so tight because of all the stress and would develop heart conditions such as Mr. Shelby. And would talk about how each time they would head to the track that they would pray that it wouldn't be their last. Phil also talked about the new car that Enzo was working on and how it would later almost be the downfall of Ferrari. In Chapter 5, it talks about how Phil made history by becoming the first American to win the Grand Prix ever. But it didn't matter to him as he was wondering about the well-being of his friend Trips, who died in an accident killing him and 13 other people. A couple weeks later after the race, which would later gain the name the Monza tragedy, the team's manager, chief engineer, and the finance guru left all at once. Bankrupt and struggling, Ferrari found perfection in his cars but at a high price. The battle begins. Once Ford heard the news, they went to Italy to try strike a deal. Some photos were taken, some discussion, and then things took a turn for the worse. Enzo saw that if they went with Ford, he would have to give up being the CEO of the racing division, in which he asked if he wanted to race at Le Mans, he would have to ask Ford and that they would have the final word. The Ford negotiator said yes. This made Enzo
And it worked,
furious
because Fiat
and caused
bought
Ford to
them,
lose a deal,
which
but
they gave
Ferrari
Enzo
pulled
full
a
control of the
180
racing
on Ford.
division.
Ferrari never had any intention to sell to Ford. On top of that, Enzo insulted Henry Ford II personally, saying he will never be Henry Ford. This made the Duke very angry. What was his response? It was to make a car that would put Ferrari in the dirt. He would assemble a team with his best engineers and would later hire someone to help the sinking ship, which was none other than the chicken farmer himself, Carroll Shelby. Shelby then would hire British tank commander Ken Miles to test drive the developing car, aka the GT40. After thinking they had perfected the car for its battle at Le Mans, they took the GT40 to one of the hardest endurance races, which was the 2,000 kilometers of Daytona. That's 1,242.74 miles for you freaking Yanks! Ferrari was also at the race, and to beat them would be a huge boost for them, and they did exactly that. But that would be the only race they would win throughout the entire season. What made it worse is that when they entered Le Mans, Ferrari won once again that year and 4 other races prior. Henry Ford was beginning to become a bit antsy in his pantsy and has invested so much time and money but nothing to show. Meanwhile, Enzo's laughing himself to sleep knowing how bad Ford was struggling. Henry said, This year will get them, and so Shelby redesigned the GT40. This time it would have a Goliath 7-liter V8. The 427 was good for 485 buff horses, which was the same engine they were using in NASCAR. In other words, it was American as Henry Ford then brought in another team, which was the head of Ford's NASCAR division, Holman Hootie, for healthy competition and to have a better chance to win. Both teams raced for the entire season, but when it came to Le Mans, he had to remind them that they are here to beat Ferrari, so settle your differences on your own time. The time has come. As the 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans started, Ford had a okay start. Ken Miles ran into a problem as when the race began, the door wouldn't shut. Not only that, but he ran a full lap with this problem. Another problem they ran into was the brakes of the cars, as they would have to change the brakes halfway through the race. Many teams saw this as cheating, but the rules said nothing about it, and so the inspectors let it pass. By 3 a.m. that morning, 3 of Shelby's GT40s were in the lead, and Ferrari had suffered major damage. As the hours passed by and the laps got more intense, the last 2 Shelbys and 1 Holman Hootie GTs crossed the finish line in a triangle formation at 4 p.m. and beat Ferrari. Final thoughts. Come on. Because this is a ELA project, I should probably give my opinion, so would I recommend this book? Yes. It's a good book overall, and it's a treat to any car enthusiast. The book was filled with thrills and suspense, but had maybe 4 filler chapters. Like, half a chapter was dedicated to a divorce that had no effect on future events. Since this is a nonfiction book, I can't say too much about the characters, but the tone was amazing. You can really feel the tone shift after Henry Ford II was offended and could tell that it went from an idea to an obsession. The message is nice too. If you have a goal, go for it and never give up on it. So yeah, I'd probably give this book 8 out of 10. That's it.